Good morning, you guys. So, this video is not the video that I was going to make. In fact, the video that I bumped this video for wasn't the video I was going to make. The whole Kanye West thing over on Alex Jones is completely thrown off my schedule. I will be doing a really interesting deep dive on that one, but while I was doing research to get footage to compare things that some Jewish conservatives have said to what literally came out of Kanye's mouth, um, I came by this video by PragerU. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to debunk a PragerU video? Hey, guys. So let's just get into it. I want to kind of just smash through this. This one I think I'm like 100% sure this one's going to just stay live in public. It might be the only one in this series that will. But I think I want to debunk this and I want to leave it public. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a little bit of the video and then I'm going to go to my PowerPoint. So I'll be switching back and forth between the video and my PowerPoint where it's relevant. Sometimes I won't, but let's go ahead. Let's just get into it.
And now for a brief history of slavery. Here's the first thing you need to know. Slavery was not invented by white people. It did not start in 1619 when the first slaves came to Jamestown.
I actually think that this is hilarious. I don't know if she did the research on this her own, but I do find this to be very funny. I will say I agree with her. Slavery has gone on since the beginning of time. That is very true. I'm not even going to dispute that. I think we all know that. But this is the apologetic nature of this video is very problematic.
It existed before then. It did not start in 1492 when Columbus discovered the New World. In fact, when the intrepid explorer landed in the Bahamas, the native Taino tribe hoped that he would help them defeat their aggressive neighbors, the Caribs.
Okay. So let's stop there. I want to go to my PowerPoint because were the Caribs, were they actually cannibals? First of all, I want to say that as I go over to my PowerPoint, I am just really shocked and appalled. I am really shocked and appalled that Candace Owens quoted Wikipedia, literally verbatim, just quoted Wikipedia as part of this video. Wikipedia is not a source of any kind of real information at all whatsoever. Right here, I'm going to blow this up so you guys can see it. This is what Wikipedia says. Let me move this over. I want to blow this up so you can see it. She's making a video to do white apologetics for slavery and literally verbatim quotes Wikipedia that Taínos told Columbus that the Caribs were fierce warriors and cannibals who made frequent raids on the Taínos. Are you following what I'm saying? The Taínos told Columbus that the Caribs were fierce warriors and cannibals. Let's hear it again, because that's straight from Wikipedia. I mean, I think if you're going to do a white apologetic video for slavery, the least that you can do, the very least you can do is not verbatim quote Wikipedia. I just thought that was very funny. I want to play it again because I cannot believe that's the effort that was put into this video.
Bahamas, the native Taino tribe hoped that he would help them defeat their aggressive neighbors, the Caribs. The Caribs enslaved the Taino and, on occasion, served them for dinner.
Ridiculous, right? Okay. So Wikipedia is not a source. But more importantly, the reality of things is that it turns out when archaeologists, an archaeological team that was a collaboration between Syracuse University, Farmingdale State College, and Brooklyn College. So you had three schools that sent out an archaeological team as a collaborative effort to a 12-acre site in Indian Creek. This archaeological team was led by Dr. Reg Murphy, and they were able to look into the diet and the remains of generations of these Carib people. And I quote Dr. Murphy, the lead on this archaeological expedition. He says, that they hope to reevaluate these long held assumptions. From analyzing their diet, we have found no evidence that Caribs ever ate humans. The narrative of Caribs as savage cannibals was based solely on colonial accounts. Dr. Murphy stated that we know nothing about them except what the Europeans told us, and they had their own agenda. So, no, they weren't cannibals, according to actual archaeologists. That's the first of many lies that PragerU is going to try to put forth in this video. One of many lies. Let's get back to the video though, because I want to quickly just debunk all of this. She is an idiot, but honestly, it's important because trust me, there are people who watch this video who don't actually know how to refute half of the crap she's saying.
Slavery existed in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. The word slave actually.
So I want to go back to this thing. She says slavery, talking about pre-transatlantic slavery, existed in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. I thought this was real cute. I thought this was really cute that she did this. She completely left out Europe, as if slavery just didn't exist in Europe. The only slavery that Europeans engaged in was transatlantic slavery. But that's not the case. Actually, I think I'll leave it on her map because on my PowerPoint, I literally just have a copy of this map. That's not the case. The reality is that slavery was super common in Europe prior to chattel slavery or the transatlantic slave trade. This little country right here should be lit up with the rest of these countries. This is a very selective history slavery map that PragerU has up here. It should also be mentioned that the Slav slaves that she's about to talk about were taken from Eastern Europe. They were taken from Eastern Europe and enslaved by Muslims from Spain. In fact, according to a very interesting book called Slave Raiding and Slave Trading, Europeans from Northern and Southern Europe engaged in trading white slaves with Muslims. This is way before the transatlantic slave trade. And they viewed it as selling outsiders. And this is a quote, selling outsiders, which were Slavs from Eastern Europe, to other outsiders, which were Muslims. So why Europe is not lit up on this map, along with Africa and Asia, along with the Middle East, is pure deception. Because the Europeans were some of the first to have slaves. They enslaved their own people. They were no different, and they should be lit up all orange as well.
Middle East. The word slave actually comes from the Slavs of Eastern Europe. Millions of them, all white by the way, were captured and enslaved by Muslims in the 9th century and later by the
Ottoman Empire, she's about to say. I want to say that slave does not come from Slav. That's not even true. I don't know, so let me go back to that frame. Slave does not come from the word Slav. In fact, a Russian historian and author, Alesky, and I don't want to butcher his name, it's like Vinogradov. He has written many, many books. He's a well-known historian. And he notes that the word slave is something that people commonly mistaken and equate to Slav. But that the word slave, the way that we say it now, didn't even come into common use until the 13th century. And that was during a time where large-scale wars that could produce streams of Slavic slaves to Western Europe didn't exist. So, in fact, the word Slav has origins in Latin that derive its meaning from the Greek, and that way back in the Byzantine Empire in the 6th century, before what Candace Owens is even mentioning in this video, that they were using that word to describe the Slavic people. They were referred to Slavs way, way before. Generations before, like I said, the 6th century, before Otto the Great's troops started to capture thousands of Slavs. Now, keep in mind that Otto the Great is German. So this whole slave trade that she's talking about, the white slave trade, almost every racist conservative is trying to bring up these days, that slave trade was European on European violence, European on European slavery. They were victims of each other. But the word Slav does not mean slave. Slave did not derive from Slav. The Slavic people were called Slavs way before there ever was a slavery. In fact, when we talk about the etymology of Slav, what historians actually believe is that the word Slavs was derived from Slavo, which means people who can speak our way. It's between that, or etymologists also believe that Slav could have been derived from an ancient Indo-European word, Slaos, which simply means people. Slav in no way, shape, or form means slave. And that is according to historians and etymologists. It doesn't mean slave. It means people who speak our way, or just people. Which makes sense that it would mean something like people who speak our way, since it was Europeans enslaving other Europeans. Let's get back to the video.
Europe. Millions of them, all white by the way, were captured and enslaved by Muslims in the 9th century and later by the Ottoman Turks. Slavery existed when the Roman Empire controlled the Mediterranean and most of Europe from the 1st through the 5th centuries. Slavery existed when Alexander the Great conquered Persia in the 4th century BC. It was so common that Aristotle simply considered it natural.
I love that she brought this up. I love that she brought up Aristotle and how Aristotle considered slavery natural. Let's talk about what Aristotle had to say about slavery, because a lot of this is going to sound familiar to you. And literally, one might say that Aristotle provided the blueprint for chattel slavery. One could truly say that. And I'll tell you why. Because in the time of Aristotle, obviously they're in Greece. And so in Athens, at the time, slaves were not citizens. Now, the Greeks would get in wars with each other and they would often enslave other Greeks. But most of the slaves that the Greeks kept at the time were foreigners. Slavery in Greece was hereditary, much like chattel slavery. You can see that Europeans got the ideas for chattel slavery from their own history. So slavery was hereditary, and they almost never freed their slaves in Greece. The Greeks really thought, as you well know, they thought that they were intellectuals. They liked to spend their days thinking. And if all you want to do is sit around and do nothing, then you need somebody to do all the works. So slavery was very pervasive in Greek because it allowed the Greeks the time to do nothing but kind of lay around and think. Now, let's talk a little bit about Aristotle. Aristotle thought that social norms automatically reflected what is natural. I can think of a lot of liberals who believe the same thing. It's like because homosexuals are having sex with each other, it must be natural, right? Because people want to sleep with little kids, it must be natural. Well, that's kind of what Aristotle's idea was, which explains why the Greeks were into all that weird stuff that they were into. Pedophilia and the whole like, right? Bestiality, they were freaks in Greece. So, Aristotle thought that if there was a social norm, that it automatically reflected what was natural. So, since there were slaves, lots and lots of slaves in Athens, he believed that slavery was natural. He went on to say, and this is a really interesting read. You should really read Aristotle's views on slavery because they're quite fascinating. Aristotle believed that some people lacked the capacity to reason. And because these people lacked the capacity to reason, it would naturally follow that they lacked impulse control. Now, if you have a person that cannot reason and does not have impulse control, they could do anything. Those types of people were natural slaves in Aristotle's eyes because they lacked the capacity to be rational and direct their own lives. So, slavery actually ended up being beneficial for these natural slaves because there would be somebody rational there to control them. Now, I know this is already sounding familiar to you. You've definitely heard pro slavery arguments from the past and some crazy people from the present who have said things very similar. It's giving me white man's burden and paternalism. But Aristotle got even deeper. He claimed that it wasn't really difficult to prove that there were natural slaves because basically, and this is a direct quote from Aristotle, as different from others as body is from soul, are beast from human, and that nature. He goes on to say that nature tends to make the bodies of slaves and free people different too. The former strong enough to be used for necessities, and the latter useless for that sort of work. So, surely you've heard that even the slave masters that existed in colonial America, that they believed that Black people were built stronger and they were good for work. That's literally what Aristotle's saying. He's saying that there's some people whose bodies you look at them and clearly they're not designed to do any work. And there's other people who are built for work. So just by looking at a person, you can tell if they are a natural slave or not. And he went on to say that, occasionally a natural slave could birth a free person, but that was very atypical. And he did believe that from the hour of a person's birth, this is actually a direct quote from Aristotle, from the hour of their birth, Some are marked out for subjection, others for rule. And Aristotle firmly believed that overall it was non Greek people who were natural slaves. I think it's interesting that Candace Owens chose to use Aristotle, possibly the worst person to use, unless this is some kind of coded white supremacist, reference that she's making, because anybody can go and read what Aristotle had to say about slavery. And honestly, it's pretty out there. It's giving me chattel slavery vibes, paternalism, good old fashioned racism vibes. That's what Aristotle's opinions on slavery are giving me. But leave it up to PragerU to choose to use Aristotle, possibly the worst human being to cite on this topic, as evidence that, hey, slavery was just par for the course. Let's keep going.
The slave master model was just how the world operated in the great philosopher's day. Slavery existed during the time of the ancient Egyptians 5,000 years ago. As far back as we can go in human history, we find slavery. As renowned historian John Steele Gordon notes from time.
I want to just stop because they keep quoting people who are the worst possible people to quote. Right now, she's quoting John Steele Gordon. Now, this is interesting to me because John Steele Gordon is actually a real piece of work. Let me just read you a few excerpts. And I don't know that he's a renowned historian. I'm not sure about that. I mean, I guess to somebody maybe he is. But he is an author and he does give a lot of lectures. That is true. But I want to share some of the things that he writes with you because you're going to understand why PragerU was really on board with quoting this man. This is a little article that he wrote called A Short History of Morality. And essentially, in this uh, article, he is defending not taking down statues of old races. He asks the question, he says, Christopher Columbus was guilty of genocide. He agrees with that. Christopher Columbus is guilty of genocide. He's stating that as a fact. George Washington owned slaves. He goes on to say, leaving aside the moral smugness of the topplers, do they have a case? The answer is no. The argument that men such as Columbus and Washington are guilty of moral turpitude and thus worthy of our respect, and are thus unworthy of our respect and admiration is inescapably based on the idea that 21st century concepts of right and wrong have been in place since the dawn of humankind and won't change in the future. So he's essentially saying they may be bad guys, but you know what? It was different back then. Kind of what Candace Owens just said. It was different back then. When I made that Dahomey Warrior video, I had a lot of Black people come under my comments section and say we shouldn't be mad at the Dahomeys for trading slaves because you know what? It was different back then. That's the argument that he's making. And he goes on along that same vein for the whole article. This was another interesting article that he wrote. It's on racism against white people. He waxes lyrical about this amazing school that he went to, right? And he goes, the school has changed a lot since I graduated, as has the world, and have I. It is now co-ed and about twice as big, with much bigger facilities. In my day, with the exception of a few Asian students, the student body was entirely white and mostly from affluent families. He goes on to say that now it's more culturally diverse and economically diverse. But the thing that he's mad about in this article is that a scholarship for students who don't have money is being offered so that they can have access to better schools. And he says that a scholarship that is purely directed at impoverished people of color excludes white people. He also believes that it excludes Asians, but we know that Asians do qualify as people of color, but whatever. And thus is racist, and so the scholarship should not be so. Another gem that he wrote, which I thought was pretty fabulous. I mean, you're getting what kind of person he is, right? You're getting his ideology. Run of the mill far right. In this article, disparate impact strikes again. He is upset that at a school that is predominantly white, the black children are, people are saying the black children are being singled out for punishment. He argues that these kids aren't being singled out, they're just horrible children, as blacks are. And his general writing is kind of along that vein. If you've heard one extremely far right person, you've heard them all. Imagine what he would say, and that's what he says. So that's who PragerU is quoting. I just wanted to give you perspective on this renowned historian that they're talking about.
Immemorial, slaves were a major item of commerce. As much as a third of the population of the ancient world was enslaved. Here's the second thing you need to know. White people were the first to formally put an end to slavery. In 1833, Britain was the first.
Now, you guys, I'm going to comment on this, but you guys know that I have an entire video about white men ending slavery. So I don't want to get super into this, but for people who haven't seen the last video, I will make some commentary on this.
First country in the history of the world to pass a Slavery Abolition Act. They were quickly followed by France, who in 1848 abolished slavery in her many colonies. Then, of course, came the 13th Amendment in the United States Constitution.
Okay, I want to stop there. Let's stop here. Let's go to all the white people that abolished slavery. Now, I have an in-depth video about this, but I'm just going to gloss over it, okay? First and foremost, England wasn't the first country to end slavery. The French ended slavery July 16th, 1802. I'm sorry, February 4th, 1794. The French abolished slavery February 4th, 1794. But then they thought better of it, and in 1802, they reinstated slavery. Now, Britain did go on to abolish slavery. Slavery still continued on their plantations, on their colonies until 1838. And when they did release the people, they released them unceremoniously. And one could argue they didn't release them at all, because from 1820 to 1832, the British basically killed all of the Tasmanians, just genocidal. From 1863 to 1904, the Melanesian slavery epidemic happened where 2,000 Melanesian people were literally brought to Australia and enslaved there to work on Queensland sugar plantations. So even though, officially slavery had ended, Britain was still engaging in slavery. In 1885 to 1908, you had the entire Congolese Holocaust. 10 million Congolese people were murdered. Millions other were maimed by Queen Victoria's first cousin. 1825 to 1945, you had the Great Andamanese Holocaust, a complete genocide of their people. 1879 to 1920, you had 5-year slaves, which were Indian slaves that were used on British and Australian-run sugarcane plantations. Now, this is all the way into 1920. 1945, you had the Indian Holocaust. They killed 29 million Indians by starving them to death. They stole all of their food and they sent the food to Great Britain, and the Indians starved to the tune of almost 30 million people. And then let us not forget on their Commonwealth, Australia, all the way up until 1970, they were kidnapping Aboriginal children, the whole stolen generation, so that they could breed them out in these government funded breeding programs and breed them white. We don't want to forget that in 1932, there was the whole North Australian Workers' Union situation where they basically were enslaving Australian people. And there's that wonderful quote by Owen Roe, which really sums it up. After Britain ended slavery, Owen Roe said, if there is no slavery in the British Empire, then the NT is not part of the British Empire, the Northern Territories, for it certainly exists here in its worst form. So, why do I bring this up? Because there was a habit, this whole white people ended slavery thing, of white people ending slavery and then not actually ending slavery. They say that they're ending slavery, but their behavior continues, and people are still enslaved. Now, with that said, I want to get on the 13th Amendment. I'm going to play what they have to say about the 13th Amendment, and then I want to really talk about how the 13th Amendment was no different from what the Europeans did, which is claim to end slavery and then not actually end slavery at all.
In the United States Constitution. After centuries of human slavery, white men led the world in putting an end to the abhorrent practice.
Okay. Now, this abhorrent practice, right? Let's go back to the 13th Amendment. Now, you guys have all heard of the Black Codes, but I want to talk a little bit more about specifically how the Black Codes led to slavery. I'm going to give you examples, real examples of some of the laws and how they were handled. So, this is one of the Black Code laws. Every Negro is required to be in the regular service employment of some white person. It has to be a white person or former owner. Hear what I'm saying. This is a law, okay? So they free the slaves and then make a law that says that Black people must be employed by white people or the former master that owned them, who shall be held responsible for the conduct of said Negro. So the Black people work for the white people. This is mandatory by law. And just like Aristotle said, the white person is then responsible for the Negro's behavior. Now, if for some reason a Black person is not employed by a white person, these are the Black Codes, take one guess at what happens to them. What happens to them? What do you think? They go to jail. And then once they are in jail, there are penalties and fines to pay. But obviously, if you're unemployed, you don't have money. So you stay in jail and you just work as a slave in prison. This is the Black Codes for you. But slavery, that's abolished. Let me give you another example. No Negro shall be permitted to rent or keep house within said parish community. So there were certain places where Black people couldn't live. Any Negro violating this provision shall be immediately ejected and compelled to find an employer. There's that employer thing, got to find a white person to work for. And any person who shall rent or give use of any house to any Negro in violation of this section shall pay a fine of $5 for each offense. So if you live in the wrong neighborhood, you're going to be kicked out of the neighborhood, and then you're going to need to find a white person to hire you. But if the white person doesn't hire you, then you go to jail. Whereas the white person that was renting to you only pays a $5 fine. The Negro goes to jail, and then guess what? You get to be used for slave labor. in prison. Let's look at another black code law because white men ended slavery with the 13th Amendment. That's what Candace Owens said, not me. It says, no public meetings or congregations of Negroes shall be allowed within said parish after sunset. But such public meetings and congregations may be held between the hours of sunrise and sunset. But you need special permission. By the special permission in writing of the captain of patrol, aka the popos, within whose beat such meetings shall take place. So basically, you can only be more than 2 deep from sunrise to sunset. And then you have to find a police officer who's working the beat in the area that you guys want to meet up. Even if you're just hanging out to let's just shoot the breeze, right? You cannot congregate. And he has to tell you in writing that it's okay for you to just sit around and talk to other black people in a group. And if you're caught talking to more than one other black person, if there's 3 or 4 of you all standing around talking in a group without something in writing from the police saying that you can do it, then you go to jail and you can be used for prison labor. Do you follow where I'm going with this? Those are the black codes. That's the kind of crap. It just goes on and on and on. Right? There's so many different ones. And so effectively, this created, I could make a whole separate video on the black codes. I don't want to go off onto it, but I give the examples of what happened after the Europeans so-called ended slavery, what happened after the 13th Amendment was passed, to say that passing a law claiming that you're ending slavery doesn't mean anything if you actually don't end slavery. You follow what I'm saying? But let Candace Owens tell it.
Includes the 300,000 Union soldiers, overwhelmingly white, who died during the Civil War. Now, am I saying that this makes white people better than anyone else? Of course not.
That is literally what she's saying. This whole video is to make white people look as if they're better than everyone. That's the whole purpose of the video.
Here is to simply tell the truth. And the truth is that human history is complicated. No one, regardless of skin color, stands guiltless.
Okay, I agree there. Human history is complicated, and nobody, no matter what the color of their skin, is guiltless. We can agree there. I've been able to agree with her on 2 things on this video. There's a lot of misrepresentations here, and I've tried to catch them all, but I do agree with her on this.
Yet today we are never told to consider the murderous Persian Empire or the cannibalism of indigenous tribes of North and South America.
I want to reiterate that the cannibalism she referred to, actual archaeologists said that it didn't exist. There's no evidence of it. It's just something that the colonizers were saying.
The heinous actions under the imperialistic Muslim, Chinese, Mongol, or Japanese empires, to name just a few.
And I don't like this argument. Listen, if I or you or anybody, let's say you beat a child to death. You just beat the child up. And somebody comes to you and says, "Man, you're a child abuser." And you go, "No, there have been people who have abused their children and done far worse than me, and child abuse has been going on forever, and I'm not a bad person. Don't single me out because I abused my child." I mean, that's kind of what's going on here. It's like if you rape somebody, but you're like, "But rape has been going on forever, and, at least I didn't rape and kill her," because, some people rape and kill, and rape has been happening for thousands of years, and rapists have, been on every single planet. Why are you pointing out the fact that I raped somebody? Why are you trying to make me feel bad that I raped somebody? That's the argument, and I think it's pretty sad when your best argument against doing something wrong is, "Hey, other people have done it."
Instead, we're told that slavery is a white phenomenon. And like all persistent lies, this lie spawns a bunch of other lies. On social media, I come across extraordinary depictions about how Africans lived like pharaohs before Europeans came and laid waste to their paradise. I wish any of this were true, but it's not.
Okay, all Africans weren't pharaohs, but Europeans legit did lay waste to Africa. Now, I can make a whole video. I mean, honestly, most African artifacts are in Europe right now because they were made of gold and precious stones. I mean, there's a lot we can say about how they went through. Anybody that's ever been in my social studies class knows we talk about archaeological sites in Africa where like statues and things were just completely destroyed. They just were knocking stuff over and destroying things because that's super common when you conquer a place to want to destroy their monuments. So we weren't all pharaohs. I mean, slaves didn't come from Egypt, and I'm so sick of Black Americans trying to attach ourselves to Egypt, and our ancestors are not from Egypt. But Europeans did lay waste to Africa. That did happen.
It's a fantasy. The truth is that Africans were sold into slavery by other Black Africans, and in many cases, sold for items as trivial as gin and mirrors.
That's true. That's true. That's some Black idiocy for you. I mean, there's no escaping that. I know many Black people try to get around the fact that Black people have historically behaved in absolutely mentally retarded ways, but there's just no getting around that.
Whites didn't go into the interior and round up the natives. They waited on the coast for their Black partners to bring them Black bodies. The stark reality is that our lives had very little value to our ancestors.
So this was triggering for me. Her saying that our lives had very little value to our ancestors because she's not talking about the lives of the people who were sold. She's saying our lives, as in you and me. And what if I did this to white people? Because, this video is really about white people for white people. The Europeans' ancestors didn't value their lives either. I mean, during the Middle Ages, slavery was widely practiced in Europe. The Europeans also practiced other types of involuntary servitude like captivity and serfdom. Rome literally utilized slavery as its main mode of production until the 14th and 15th centuries. Medieval Europeans enslaved each other as well as non Europeans. They used slaves for sex, they used slaves for reproduction, they used slaves for agricultural, domestic work, all kinds of labor. They even used slaves for military service. So, since the Europeans were raping their slaves and sticking them on the farm, since the Europeans were enslaving each other, then I guess the Europeans don't care about themselves and their offspring either. They don't care about their lineage either. So that's interesting that earlier in this video, when she was defending white people, it was, other people had slavery and it's not just white people that engaged in slavery. But then when she wanted to tell Black people that our ancestors didn't care about us, which is interesting because our ancestors were taken by different Black people and sold. So maybe our ancestors did care about us, but the Black people that were selling out did not. But she didn't want to talk about how the Europeans' ancestors didn't care about them. So that's why I don't respect this. On one hand, it's don't pick on white people. They're not the only people that, engaged in slavery. Everybody did it. But on the other hand, it's but Black people, your ancestors didn't love you. Doesn't matter that Europeans treated their own people bad, bought, sold, raped, and pillaged their own people, enslaved their own people. It's Black people whose ancestors didn't care about them. So I just want to take this moment and give a little PSA. If our ancestors didn't care about us, the Europeans' ancestors didn't care about them. They enslaved them for thousands of years. They were raping them and keeping them in servitude and using them as sex slaves and breeding them for thousands of years, all over Greco-Roman, the Greco-Roman Empire and before, from the 5th century to the 14th century. That is historical fact.
Here's the third thing you need to know. If you think slavery is a relic of the past, you're wrong. There are some 700,000 slaves in Africa today, right now. That's the lowest estimate that I could find. Other sources say there are many more.
Now, she says there are 700,000 slaves in Africa today, and that is how we know that slavery is not a relic of the past. I'm going to let her talk a little more.
For context, that's almost twice as many slaves as were ever brought to the United States. Child soldiers, human trafficking, forced labor, these are the conditions that currently exist within the same sub-Saharan region where the transatlantic slave trade originated. African bodies are being sold today like they were sold then.
Listen to this.
And no, they are not being purchased by any country of white men.
They are not being purchased by any country of white men. Remember, she said that. 700,000 slaves in Africa, and that's horrific. Slavery still exists, and it's black on black slavery, right? Let me go to my PowerPoint. Hold on. I'm going to show you guys this. I had to go research this. Because, white men aren't doing it. This is her assertion. This is what she is saying, right? But I'm about to bring hard facts. I'm not going to throw out random numbers. I pulled it country by country, you guys. Country by country. I'm going to try to make this as big as I can. Can I make this even bigger? I'm going to blow it up so you guys can see some of the numbers. Let me see how well you guys can see that. Oh, I don't think you guys can see this very well. Can I make this even bigger? Hold on. Do I have my PowerPoint? Let me see if my PowerPoint is still up. Oh, I don't. Okay, I don't think I can make it big enough for you guys to see it. So I'll have to read it to you. Okay. So in Greece, there are 89,000 slaves. That is the best estimate. Macedonia, 1,800. Albania, 20,000. Turkey has a lot of slaves. 509,000. Ukraine, 286,000. Croatia, 25,000. Montenegro, 4,000. Lithuania, 17,000. The Russian Federation loves slaves. They have 794,000 slaves. The Russian Federation by itself has more slaves than all of Africa right now. In fact, Germany has almost 200,000 slaves. Slovenia has 5,000. I left out Iceland and Luxembourg because they barely have, even 1,000 slaves in that country that are known. In total, Europe, that tiny, tiny, tiny country of Europe, has over 3 million slaves. Africa, 700,000. Africa, the second largest continent on the planet, 700,000. Europe, over 3 million slaves. Over 3 million slaves. And you know how she gave that cute little stat? That is more than the blah, 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 right? 3 million slaves. She said Africa has twice as many slaves as were transported in the transatlantic slave trade. But if Europe has over 3 million slaves, that's 8.5 times as many. as came through the transatlantic slave trade. So this is what I mean about she's like, "I just wanna tell the truth. I just wanna tell the truth." Well, honey, if you wanna tell the truth, then do that. Tell the truth. If you wanna call out 700,000 slaves in Africa, don't follow that up with, "But, you know, there's" oh, how is a slave defined in the study? It's defined as a slave. As a person that's been trafficked for the purpose of labor without pay. And I wanna be clear that the people who took these statistics did not just take them for Europe, they tracked slavery globally. So I just pulled all the European countries' slave stats. That's just how I chose to do it. But it's interpreting slavery in the literal sense of the word. A person is working and not being paid. Most of the people are victims of trafficking for the purpose of engaging in unpaid labor. This is also inclusive of people who are trafficked for the purpose of being pimped, sex slaves. It's interpreting it literally as slavery in the literal sense. It's interpreting it. I guarantee you where she got her number, 700,000, is where I got my number, 3 million. I guarantee you we use the same source. I'm pretty sure about that. There are not very many agencies that are tracking global slavery. So she's saying she wants to be honest. She wants to be honest, right? I just want to be honest. Well, then be honest. Don't say that white people aren't engaging in this behavior anymore and it's Africa and slavery is just going on in Africa. Slavery is wrong no matter where it is. It's just if we're going to be honest, let's be honest across the board. Let's not cherry pick. Something else is she talked about basically 350,000 slaves being brought to the United States. And that is very misleading without a wider conversation. Because between the years of 1619 and 1865, there were 10 million African slaves in this country who provided over 4 billion hours of labor. In fact, in 1860, the census counted almost 4 million slaves living just in 1860. And they bred slaves. I don't know what's worse. But I suppose why buy more? Why travel across an ocean when you can breed a slave right here on American soil? The end of this video is just her, waxing lyrical about foolishness. There's no more facts, I don't think, at the end of that video that I really need to discuss. But I wanted to do this video because PragerU is an interesting phenomenon to me. They make content that is designed to appear to be educational. And Candace Owens may very well believe what she's saying. But upon vetting that information, almost everything in that video was a lie. And the handful of things that weren't lies were grossly misrepresented. And then there were a couple of hard facts, nobody's innocent regardless of skin color. Black people did sell their own people for nothing. There were many traitorous Black people. White people were enslaved. Granted, they overarchingly enslaved each other, but they were enslaved. Slavery is not an exclusively white activity. It's a global activity. That is all true. But the misrepresentations and the out and out lies, and also using information that is very outdated, still calling tribes of people cannibals after it's been proven that they are not cannibals at all. That those reports were based on people that were colonizing them. to justify their colonization. But now that we have the technology to actually assess those archaeological sites, we are finding that much of what was said about those people was untrue. Now, when I go into this Kanye West interview that he did over on InfoWars, I'm going to be bringing out a little bit of hypocrisy. And I'm choosing to use Jewish conservatives. I'm not a fan of Kanye West, and everybody who was treating this man like he was some kind of a god is an idiot. But I do think this whole situation is very much, very, very much interesting to see the hypocrisy. Also, to hear Jewish people agreeing with Kanye West who are conservative, but then calling it anti Semitic when he says it. Or basically saying the same thing about Black people, but it's racist. Their words, not mine, when somebody says it about them. And this interview is an excellent opportunity to look at that. I'll also be using that interview that Kanye West did over on InfoWars. I'll be using that interview as an example of the idiocy of the average Black conservative. And with the little, the racist kid that he was with, that young man, I have some excellent footage of him doing an interview where I actually show a mixed race conservative playing interference and trying to make excuses for his racism so we can watch that and analyze it in real time. Sometimes I think these people don't see themselves. I honestly believe they believe what they're saying. I truly do. I believe that they believe what they're saying. So, anyway, with that said, I hope you found this video interesting. This is one that I'll go ahead and leave live. PragerU is, they're conservatives. They believe in free speech, so they should have no problem with this commentary. The Kanye West one, I may not do that on this channel. I'm not sure how I want to go about that because there's a lot of stuff I want to play and I may not, I don't know. I might do it on my backup channel and then just drop the link in my community tab, or I might just say to heck with it and just do it on this channel. We'll have to see. That'll be sometime today, probably on the late night. Okay. Anyway, you guys have a nice morning and I will talk to you guys later.